The New Orleans Saints should not rest their laurels on a well-received draft class when there are some major players they could grab in free agency. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a senior writer and reporter over at Saints News Network. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, we're going to take a look at the realistic expectations that should be had around draft classes, because there's some information floating around that I don't think is being sort of looked at the way that it should be. So we're going to break that down. We're also going to be taking a look at Khristian Boyd, what he brings that's ready, where it is that he needs to grow, and how it is he could have an immediate impact as a 6th-round draft prospect for the New Orleans Saints. But to kick everything off today, I wanted to take a look at veteran free agency. We're about to see teams warming up again in sort of the free agent landscape in terms of where things are after the draft. And there are some big-time impact players that the New Orleans Saints should have their eyes on to really put a bow on their well-received offseason thus far. We appreciate you very much for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. And of course, for being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends at Monopoly Go. You know, I've got a competitive side, and it is a big-time fan of Monopoly Go, the classic or the mobile hit twist on the classic Monopoly that you know and love. So join your friends and download it today for free. Monopoly Go on the App Store and Google Play. So I think that there are a handful of free agents still remaining that the New Orleans Saints should absolutely be after now that the draft is all said and done. And the big reason why is because I think that a lot of the draft class for New Orleans, the first couple of guys could have some immediate impact. But beyond that, most of what you're looking at in this draft class are guys that are going to have immediate impacts on special teams or developmental impacts, hopefully in the future. That's not a bad thing. That's what you should be using the draft for. But I think that the Saints, if they want to be better in 2024, still have some talent that they need to add at particular positions. And each one of those positions can still be addressed in veteran free agency. I went over to NFL.com to take a look at the top 101 NFL free agents that were on the market and those that are left remaining. And so I wanted to knock down some of these, take a look at them, and then kind of notate why I think that they would be good selections for the New Orleans Saints. And I think one of the biggest things is that the Saints still have holes to fill. Interior offensive line did not get addressed in the draft, has not been addressed thus far in free agency, unless they're going to move Ali Udoh back inside, but he struggled there over in Minnesota. The Saints might feel really good about Nick Saldiveri, but we just don't know that yet. And so adding talent there makes sense. Safety is another spot where the Saints could potentially get a bona fide starter in free agency right now, although they might feel good with Jonathan Abram and in the recent addition of Will Harris, while also having second-year safety Jordan Howden back there as well. So big positions like that could still use a little bit of help. Wide receiver as well, edge rusher as well, all these other things. So let's take a look here. Starting with the 37th ranked free agent, the number 2 guy that's still available behind Stephon Gilmore, who's ranked number 16 on this list, Justin Simmons. I know he's 30 years old. I get it, but he's a fantastic safety. He's a phenomenal safety, and he's one that we've been talking about. You probably heard John Hendricks and I talking about this for, probably since the HBCU Combine when we saw Justin Simmons and Marcus Robertson standing over on the sideline talking. Of course, as I've said many times on this show, Simmons, Joe Woods, New Orleans Saints defensive coordinator, and Marcus Robertson, the Saints defensive backs coach, all have a history. It could make a ton of sense. And he would be a fun one to bring in to be able to pair with Tyrann Mathieu because he can do a bit of everything. He's got leadership. He's got experience like crazy. He's a playmaker as well over in the secondary. We know the New Orleans Saints really wanted to see their takeaway numbers tick up last year. They did a good job of that, but they could get better in that range. And I think Justin Simmons is the guy that would absolutely help them do that. Now, the biggest thing is going to be how much is he asking for and can the Saints make a contract work? But remember, they made a contract work with Jairus Byrd when they had no money at all left in their available salary cap. So they could make a deal like this work. That probably would be a lot more beneficial than that Jairus Byrd contract ended up being. Let's take a look at another spot, wide receiver. New Orleans Saints could still use a big-bodied guy. Ideally, somebody that plays at the X, but as we've talked about here before, that could be A.T. Perry's role. It could be a place that we see Equanimeous St. Brown. We could see Cedric Wilson maybe challenge there, although Cedric Wilson has kind of been at his best in the slot. But if the Saints wanted to get another big-bodied possession receiver that they could deploy from the slot as well, they could go with the Tyler Boyd. Not going to get T. Higgins, who's pretty much bracing to play for the Cincinnati Bengals. It seems unlikely that Cincinnati Bengals are going to be trading anybody away. This isn't the NBA. When you ask for trades, you rarely get them here in this league. And so I could see the Saints maybe going after, or I could see the value in the Saints maybe going after another wide receiver that has a big frame, that is a possession guy, that can deploy from the slot, all those things, in Tyler Boyd. Now, he didn't have the successful 2023 that I think that many expected him to have, but still 67 catches for 667 yards and 2 touchdowns. You get the touchdown number up, you're perfectly happy with adding that yardage, you're adding that volume to a receiver here in this New Orleans Saints offense. He hasn't had under 600 receiving yards any season with the exception of his second year back in 2017 with the Cincinnati Bengals. He's had multiple 4-5 touchdown seasons, 1-7 touchdown season. I think he's a guy that could potentially be helpful if the Saints decide that that's a spot that they still want to address and add more competition. They added Bub Means. We broke down Bub Means in Friday's episode when we were taking a look at, that was Thursday's episode. We looked at Jalen Ford on Friday's episode. But just taking a look at all the different ways that he might be able to contribute, but we don't know if he's going to be the big-bodied receiver, the possession receiver. Hopefully he could be. That'd be really cool. That'd be a great move for New Orleans to land a guy that's a better pro than a college player in the 5th round, but we just don't know if that's going to be the case. So adding veteran options could make a ton of sense. Let's go to number on the list 95, Emmanuel Ogbah. Now, he didn't have the most productive 2022. 2023 was weird because he kind of got moved into defensive tackle over in Miami. But going back to his Cleveland days, his Kansas City days, and his early Miami days, he was a guy that had a lot of impact. Consistently had 4 or 5 sacks on seasons, had a 9-sack season his first year in Miami. Then they started to change his role up a little bit. He went back-to-back on 9-sack seasons. Then once they started to change the defensive scheme a little bit over the course of the past 2 years, you saw everything drop off. 1 sack in 2022, but then got 5.5 last year, rushing from the interior for the most part in 2023. So getting him to a place where he could rotate, play inside and out, get an opportunity to help out where he's at his best, which is on the outside, that could be something that could benefit New Orleans as well. Lastly, I mentioned Dalton Risner. Dalton Risner, the interior offensive lineman that has earned starting roles with 3 or 4 different coaching staffs now, has impressed all along the way. Didn't get the market that he was looking for last year, so he waited until mid-season to sign with the Vikings. But there's an opportunity here for you to be able to maybe say, hey, you don't have to wait that long, right? Get you in the building now. Saints have an open spot right now at left guard where they could certainly use some help. And maybe a guy like Dalton Risner, who has played in Kubiak's system before, has been around Kubiak before, has played in these sort of wide zone systems before, that could be one that is an easy fit for the New Orleans Saints. So Dalton Risner remains on my list. Saints could go to a familiar face in Andrews Pete as well. Get yourself some left tackle and left guard versatility there because you still don't really know if you have the answer at left tackle. You're kind of hoping you do in Trevor Penning and that this new system really benefits him. But, grabbing any of these guys, along with other players like Connor Williams, who I know is coming off the ACL tear, so it depends on his medicals. Calais Campbell's 38 years old, but he's still fearsome. Like, could he potentially be somebody that can help? You know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of these guys that are still out there that could at least come in and play a rotational role. Maybe Calais Campbell's not necessarily what you're looking for nowadays, but in any case, you get what I'm saying. Like, the Saints have had a good offseason so far. I like what they did with their coaching staff. I like their draft, but free agency's kind of been hush-hush for the most part, 1-year deals and stuff like that. Love the Willie Gay signing. We'll see on the Chase Young signing, like some of the supplemental signings that they've had. But I think that this is a team that could still go out there and maybe land an impact player here in late free agency. They've done it a few times. Clearly, the roster of available players out there could still allow them to get that done here in 2024 as well. And in fact, I think it would make everybody feel a lot more comfortable and optimistic about their offseason to land some number of players of this level if they're able to get it done in free agency. Coming up next, the Saints got to figure out what they've got in their 6th-round prospect in Khristian Boyd coming out of University of Northern Iowa. But I got to tell you, there's a lot to like about this guy. We got that coming up for you as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel, our official sports betting partners here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel is letting you bring home a big win of your own in the process. Right now, new customers will get $150 in bonus bets by winning any $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets that you can put on spreads, on money lines, player props, and so much more. You can even go and use some of that. Take a look at the NBA Finals odds. Right now, the Boston Celtics are favored at plus 105. Denver Nuggets in second place at plus 500. And the Minnesota Timberwolves have shown some fight here with Anthony Edwards at plus 600. So much to check out. And the NBA, the NHL, the MLB, and so much more. All you have to do is visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. And you can make every playoff shot count. Go and check them out today. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, family. The New Orleans Saints have been looking for a consistent run-stuffing presence on their defensive interior since trading away Malcolm Brown, and they may have found one in Khristian Boyd if his length doesn't end up impeding his ability to impact at the next level. We got that coming up for you here as we continue on with our look over the draft class for the New Orleans Saints. Appreciate you very much as always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget to go and check out Locked On Sports today as well. 24/7 national sports stream, the first of its kind on YouTube or on the Amazon Fire TV channels app, where you can get all the biggest stories covered by the people that know the teams the best every single day. It's over at Locked On Sports today on YouTube or that free Amazon Fire Channels TV app. All right, so as we take a look at Khristian Boyd here, I'm reducing this one down to just one conversation because I think that the big thing around Khristian Boyd is that like what his limitations are very well known. Where it is that he can have an immediate impact, also very well known. So we're not having to do like a big deep dive here. This one's not that sort of convoluted or complicated. I think the things that, we're going to be looking at here are pretty obvious. So where could he have his immediate impact? You have his immediate impact as a rotational player on the defensive interior. So you got Bryan Bresee, you got Colin Saunders, you got Nathan Shepard, all of which are going to be firmly implanted before Khristian Boyd to begin the season here in 2024. Now, toward the end of the season, maybe things change and you see Khristian Boyd maybe move up a little bit in sort of the run stopper role or something like that. But let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. But if he is going to do that, that's going to happen over the course of the season, I would imagine. Probably not at the very beginning. Remember, he's got a big leap here to make, coming from the University of Northern Iowa to the NFL, playing it over on the defensive side, a little bit different than playing it over on the offensive side for Trevor Penning, but I think it still gives you an idea of the measuring stick, the leap that you have to make, what that distance or steepness really is in terms of what that learning curve might feel like. So I think that that's the big thing that I think maybe stands in the way here of a Khristian Boyd maybe having that immediate impact is, can he make the leap competition-wise? But if we're being honest, this is something that every rookie player has to be concerned about. Every team has to be concerned about for every rookie player. No matter what, even if you're coming from the SEC to the NFL, you're still making a leap. There's still a change of difference when it comes to a change of difference, a change of competition, a difference in competition. When you're making any kind of a leap from college to the pros, his is just going to be steeper than some of those guys, right? So I think that's something that you're looking at. Where he comes in and is at his absolute best, I think that the biggest things are his ability to anchor and utilize his strength. He is a strong player. 38 bench reps broke the record over at UNI for most bench reps in succession and all that. And his goal was like 34. I think the record was 35, and then he blew past that. But his goal was like 34 when he sat down to do that, or laid down to do that, I guess. And so I think that like his upper body strength and his athleticism are two things that kind of make you go, okay, well, there's absolutely something there. Remember, this is a guy that we really liked throughout the draft process, and that's not different. It's just that his sizable impact is going to come in an area of the game that's not going to be super flashy, that's not going to get everybody out of their seats, because he's not necessarily at this moment the proven pass rusher. 3.5 sacks last year, great from the interior. What does he look like at the next level? So we're not talking about a guy that's really necessarily a one-tech penetrating pass rusher in the way that Bryan Bresee was, which is what made Bryan Bresee a first-round selection. This is a guy that's a run stopper that's going to be very helpful in sort of the one-tech position, which is lining up over that gap between the center and the guard, or sometimes nose tackle, lining up directly nose to nose with the center, otherwise known as zero tech. That's where he's going to be. He's going to be a guy that's going to be trying to take up extra bodies on the interior, get double teams on the interior so that it creates mismatches, or not mismatches, but one-on-ones, which could be mismatches elsewhere on the defensive line. And then hopefully the other guys are winning their one-on-ones. And so he's going to be one of those guys that's kind of like, it's almost like being a point guard on the interior, while Colin Saunders comes in and is a guy that can be a run stuffer for you in the middle, but that can also rush the passer. Nathan Shepard can rush the passer. Brian Brzee can rush the passer. I think that the value of a Khristian Boyd is that he comes in and can potentially grow into being your primary run stuffer by the end of the season. I mean, that's kind of what we saw from Malcolm Roach, right? Like Malcolm Roach is one of those guys that kind of became the Saints' primary run stopper earlier in the season, but then unfortunately had the injury, and then that ended up shutting him down for the year. And, that's something that the Saints have just kind of been dealing with. Ever since they traded away Malcolm Brown years ago, they've been looking for a solid, consistent presence on the defensive interior to help with their run defense. They've not been able to successfully find that guy and consistently get that guy out on the field when they do find that guy, in Malcolm Roach's case. And so I do think that that's something that you're looking at with Khristian Boyd, in that, he doesn't really have much of an injury history at all. He's been a very durable player, played 49 games at the collegiate level, 32 of which he started. He was a team captain last year, all those other things. Like, I just think that you get the leadership from him, you get the consistency from him, you get the durability from him, and you just get the mass from him as well. 6'2.5", 325, 329 pounds. Like, he's a big dude that should be able to stuff up the middle of the field. So I really, really like that. Dane Brugler noted in his draft guide that he was called, quote, the heart of the team, Khristian Boyd. So there's also something really, really cool about that when it comes to what he could potentially bring to the next level as well, especially knowing just how tight-knit the defensive line guys are and everything. Like, there's a real thing there, and that's a lot of Cam and all that. But somebody's got to be able to carry that on at some point, and so you definitely want those guys that can be the heart and soul of a unit. The things that he's got to work on, I mean, obviously we know the competition level thing, but I think another thing that's really going to be tough on him is his length. 31 5/8 inch arms, not the longest for a guy on the defensive interior. You typically want guys to be 32, 33 inch arms when it comes to that. More the better, but at the same time, like it's kind of like the same thing that we talked about with, or it's kind of similar to what we talked about with Taliesin Fuaga, to where it's like, sure, the measurement is there, but do you see it on tape? And Khristian Boyd, unfortunately, sometimes you do see it on tape. You know what I mean? Because he comes in, he wants to be that bull rusher and all that other stuff. But then as the bull rusher, sometimes if he can't get those hands where they need to be, if he can't get the arms where they need to be, then it can cause him a little bit of trouble. Now, the thing that I love about Boyd is that he fights and fights and fights and fights. Like, he's got, forgive the cliche here, but he's got a high motor. You know what I mean? He just keeps fighting and fighting and fighting and fighting. And I think that's probably in a lot of cases more important than what the initial length is can you continue to fight? Can you outlast the guy that's trying to stop you? If he can do that, then he gets the real opportunity there. The other piece of it is finishing pressures and converting them into sacks. That's something you see on every one of his scouting reports. Got to finish once he gets there and everything. And so that's a big thing that you want to see, because that's something that the Saints have dealt with constantly on their defensive line is, getting the pressures, getting to the quarterback, but not being able to take the quarterback down. Sometimes even getting their hands on the quarterback and not being able to take the quarterback down. Definitely want to see something a little bit better from this entire defensive line in concert when it comes to that. But I think that's one of those other things that you're really looking for from a Khristian Boyd, who should be able to, have an impact as a run blocker, but he's got to be able to get off of blocks a little bit more consistently. And so learning some more moves, things like that, is really going to help him with that, because right now the length kind of hurts him there. So he's got to be able to compensate for that in another way. But he's in a good room that should allow him to be able to do that. And I do think that even still, he'll still be a positive influence for the New Orleans Saints if he can get out onto the field and just develop a little bit more. He doesn't have a long way to go to get there, especially if he's going to come in and contribute as a run stuffer. But if he wants to be a little bit more all around as a defensive lineman, pass rush, all that stuff, then I think, you're going to want to see more development from him. That might take a little bit more time. But I'm curious to see just how many snaps he gets here in 2024, because I could see those snaps swelling towards the end of the season if he's continuously in there, able to help to muck stuff up in the middle, open up opportunities for other guys, and of course, be the presence that the New Orleans Saints crave so badly on the interior when it comes to run defense. I think that's where he can really, really make a mark for this team. Coming up next, let's take a look at the realistic expectations that should be had around draft classes, because there's a big time misconception about guys not getting second contracts and things like that around the New Orleans Saints. Real easy to point out when you're looking at it in a vacuum, but when you're comparing it to the rest of the NFL, Saints are pretty much where everybody else is. We got that coming up for you as we continue on and wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends at Monopoly Go. I am absolutely loving Monopoly Go. I'm playing right now with a couple of different games where I've got stuff with family. Jake from Locked On Pelicans and I are playing stuff. We've got Cody Rourke over from Locked On Broncos and I are playing stuff and messing with each other. It's just a ton of fun. We keep finding new stuff all the time. Emojis that you can send to taunt your friends when you go in and smash up their buildings with a wrecking ball or heist their vaults. Yeah, this isn't just any version of Monopoly. Here, you got wrecking balls, you got mini games, you got pachinko machines, you got vaults that you can heist, you got custom playing pieces that you can traverse the board with, and all the different types of Monopoly boards in a bunch of different worlds as well. It's just one of those things where there's always something new, timed events that help you win big, massive multipliers for a bunch of stuff as well. It's just so much fun. I seriously am having a ton of fun with Monopoly Go, and I hope that you'll enjoy it too. So I hope that you get the chance to go and check it out because there's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go. So go ahead, get off the bench and head over to download it now for free on Google Play or the App Store. It's Monopoly Go. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. There are some big-time misconceptions about what a successful draft class looks like, and this is a narrative I've been fighting for a long time, and I'm ready to put up the fisticuffs yet again. We appreciate you very much, as always, making Locked On Saints a part of your day here. Don't forget, we are your team every day. So we'll be back tomorrow to talk a little bit more Josiah Aziram, a guy that I'm really, really excited just to see develop. Who knows if he pans out, if he doesn't pan out, we'll see exactly what happens with him. But man, if there is one dude that feels the most excited to be a New Orleans Saint right now on the roster, it's Josiah Aziram. So we're going to break him down just a little bit. So I am now wanting to just take a look at sort of what the expectation for a good draft class should be. I think there's a lot of times where people have kind of gotten a little bit like convinced that the idea that 2017 draft class should be the norm of draft classes. And trust me, if they could be, every NFL team would be incredible. And, you know, or if one team were drafting the same way that the New Orleans Saints did in 2017 every single year, they'd be off to undefeated seasons. I mean, adding that amount of talent year after year after year would change everything for a franchise. But that's just simply not realistic. It's not the reality. And so what are you really looking for? What are you really hoping for that you're going to find every time that you go through a draft class? And really what you're looking for is like one or two starters and some role play guys that you end up being able to keep around, hopefully, for their entire rookie contract. The lifespan of the NFL for a player is typically 3.5 to 4 years. So when you draft a guy that's coming in on a rookie contract for 4 years, your hope is that that player over the course of that 4 years, maybe 5 if you're a first round pick, you get a 5th year option. Day 3 guys sometimes only get 3 years, couple years, 1 year to prove what they can do. But if that's the idea, then the idea, instead of, we got to get him on a second contract and all these other things, is typically how much of an impact can you have on your rookie contract before the team replaces you with somebody else on a cheaper rookie contract. And that gets a little bit more complicated each year. If you look back at it, you got 3 cornerbacks right now that are all on rookie contracts for the New Orleans Saints: Paulson Adebo, Alante Taylor, and then Kool-Aid McKinstry. Kool-Aid McKinstry is the newest player out of the 3, but Kool-Aid McKinstry is the highest paid player out of the 3 because every year the rookie contracts grow and stuff like that. So you end up trying not to hang on to older minimum contracts and things like that, so that you're kind of trending with the rest of the NFL, salary cap wise, all these other things. It just kind of keeps you like in the pocket. So you want to hold on to those guys as much as you can throughout that rookie contract where things are still cheaper. But then when it gets to the second year or the second contract time, you don't always bring those guys back because it's still cheaper to go with the rookie. So the way that I look at this, and I was asked about this on radio not too long ago, the Saints have only signed 7 of their last 19 players to a second contract, starting back in going from 2000 to 2020, right? Going from that range, because those are really the only ones that are eligible for a second contract. And a lot of this came about because the Saints did not pick up the 5th year option on Peyton Turner, which how could you, right? He's played less than 20 games in his career. You're not going to pay $13.3 million to keep him around. The Saints made a bad decision with that a few years ago, where they picked up Marcus Davenport's 5th year option for him to come around and get a half sack on the season. You can't do that with Peyton Turner right now, who has shown what he can do when he's out on the field, but hasn't yet shown that he can stay out on the field. So I think that that's a big thing that you're looking at here. So for New Orleans, the big question mark became like, well, they're mediocre at drafting because only 7 of their last 20 eligible first round picks for a contract extension have gotten contract extensions. But that's not that unusual. Look at the Kansas City Chiefs during that time, a little bit better, 9 over the last 20 years. So going from 2020 to 2000, going backwards, they had 17 first round picks over that time. They only extended 9 of them. The Philadelphia Eagles, who, Howie Roseman, greatest, general manager of all time, if you ask the right people, 18 first round picks from 2020 back to 2000, only extended 7 of them, literally the exact same as the New Orleans Saints. The Steelers are impressive, but probably the most impressive football team, right? The most impressive across the league. 20 first round picks over that 20-year span and extended 10 of them. 50%. And some of those were 1-year deals, not multi-year extensions, just a second contract. Like the qualifications right here, very, very little to get these counts. The Seattle Seahawks, another team, long-standing general manager, one of the longest-standing general managers behind Mickey Loomis in the NFL from the year 2000 through 2020. 19 first-round picks, 5 of them got another deal. And then letting guys like Bruce Irvin walk away and things like that. The Ravens, another team, highly touted as one of the best organizations in football. I probably should have did the Pittsburgh. Oh, I did do the Pittsburgh Steelers. Yeah, they were one of the ones that was up there. But 21 first-round picks during that time have extended 9. And again, a lot of those were closer to the 2000 to 2005 area, because you think about like Terrell Suggs and some of these other guys that were drafted during that time. But not a ton. And so this idea that like the Saints are in a bad place, it's really easy to think that when you're just looking at just their information and you're trying to decide, is 7 of 20 or is 7 of 19 bad, with no measuring stick, nothing to compare it to, anything like that. You got to look at these things in reference to the rest of the NFL, relative to the rest of the NFL. And relative to the rest of the NFL, the Saints are about as successful or unsuccessful, depending upon how you want to define it, as the rest of the NFL when it comes to first-round picks. This is how this works. Like, not most draft picks don't work. I didn't even look at the New York Jets, the Atlanta Falcons, some of these other teams that have had top 10 selections year after year after year after year. Atlanta's had, 4 straight top 8 selections? And all of them have gone to the wind, basically, because they've still never addressed their defense. They still think that they're a quarterback away. All these other things, like, it hadn't been great for them. Now we'll see how things turn out when we get towards the end of the Bijan Robinsons, the Kyle Pitts, the Drake Londons, the Michael Penix Jr.'s. Like, we'll see what happens in 4 years from now. But as of right now, like, this isn't really that shocking. And I just think that there's a lot of times where there's an unrealistic expectation of the success of draft classes and the success of drafted players. 250 plus players are drafted every single season. Most of them do not pan out. They just don't. And so when we look at these draft classes and we talk about things where it's like the positives and the negatives and all this sort of stuff, we got to be careful. Because we're not sitting here talking about, when we do talk about the positives, we're talking about what are the things that could help that player work out, not what are the things that guarantee that this player is absolutely going to work out. We like to use Pro Bowls and All Pros and end of season awards and stuff like that. Those aren't the guys that make a successful football team. Those are the guys that have successful individual years, and that's awesome. And oftentimes they contribute to the football team, of course, because they're playing astronomically well. But the guys that make the football team are the ones that aren't getting those recognitions, but that are the solid special teamers, that are the solid offensive linemen, the rotational offensive linemen, the 4th cornerback on the roster that had to go in for the number 1 guy because the number 1 guy got hurt, whatever. Those are the guys that make a football team. Those are the guys that you draft most of the time. So I just think that the expectations sometimes need to be kind of reined in a little bit for what a draft class actually stands for. and what the success of a draft class actually looks like. I've seen a lot of people say this might be a draft class this year that's as good as 2017. It won't be. It won't be. And even if it is, it's only as good as it is. It's not as good as 2017. It's not as good as 2006. It is as good as it is. And then when we move on from there, we'll look back and go, wow, 2024 was great. That was awesome. What a great draft class. And hopefully that's the case. But comparing it to stuff that's already happened when nothing has happened so far for this one, not the greatest way to go about this. And certainly comparing numbers to the ethos and not comparing numbers relative to the numbers that actually matter, that tell the story of that number, not going to get us anywhere. Not going to get us anywhere. So I wanted to soapbox for a moment. Sorry. I just think it's really, really important to understand like what the purpose of a draft class is and what a successful draft class looks like. If the Saints get 3 starters and some good core role play rotational players, that's a pretty fantastic draft class. If you get 1 starter and a couple of role play rotational players, that's a good draft class. Like that's the way that this really works in the NFL. Not you got to hit, 8 for 8, 7 for 7, 6 for 6 or whatever. Not every draft class is going to be 2017. That's what made 2017 special. Coming up in tomorrow's episode, we're going to be taking a look at Josiah Ezerim because I don't know a human person more excited about anything than Josiah Ezerim is excited about, Josiah Ezerim is excited about being a New Orleans Saint, and that deserves attention. We appreciate you very much as always. Make it Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Locked On Pelicans, Locked On LSU. Check out what's going on around the rest of Locked On Louisiana for your second listen today. We appreciate you very much making this a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me on the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. How you living. Let me know how you momming them. I trust Who Dat Nation. I'll holla at you.